Welcome back. Today I'm going to go over starting an engine that has sat for an extended period of time. What's an extended period of time? Kind of depends on your definition a little bit, but I would say anything over a year falls into this category. And some of the stuff you should be checking on an engine that sits for just a month or so. Some of it you should probably check on a vehicle you drive every day every once in a while. As an engine sits, the oil starts out on everything and it slowly drains down into the bottom. As it does that, it leaves bare metal which can rust. The other thing that can happen is if you've got something like this that did not have a properly sealed air cleaner on it and sat out in a snowbank, there's a fair chance that water can get down the intake manifold and into the cylinders and cause rust inside of there, or hydrolocking, which would be another issue. So I'm going to grab the camera and we'll go over some of the checks that you're going to make before you fire up an engine. Now keep in mind, this is my Ramcharger, but the butchery that is the wiring harness in it is not really something I've done. I butchered a little bit more because at this point it doesn't really matter and I just wanted to make it work. But for the most part, the wire nuts, things like that, they were already there. So now that I've got that disclaimer out of the way, I'll go ahead and put you under the hood. So the first thing that we're really going to check, and this should be pretty obvious, is the oil. Yep, it's got oil. Now if the oil is over full, it may have water down in the bottom of the oil. This engine actually ran about 1.5 years ago, so I'm not super worried about it on this one. So we've got oil. I'm not going to change it. In fact, I've never changed the oil in this Ramcharger. So why start now? The next thing that we're going to want to take a look at is the coolant. And there isn't any. Okay, after that, if this engine does start, we want to take a look at things like the automatic transmission fluid. Because if it does start and there's no fluid, you can burn up the pump in there. And the transmission fluid should be quite high when the engine hasn't been running a while. So that one had the fluid about that far above the full mark, which is good. That means that it's up where it should be, so when the engine starts, it should suck some fluid into the pump and shouldn't damage the pump. Same thing with like power steering. Really, if you can't tell, we're just going through all the fluids attached to the engine. Yeah, we don't have power steering yet. After you've checked all the fluids and made sure that they are good, what we'll do is we'll take a socket, and a ratchet, and we'll actually just turn this engine over slowly by hand to feel for any weird spots or any roughness. And I usually do that 2 times because that gets you all the way through the valve train. You shouldn't crank it with the starter because if it does have something wrong, the starter is going to jam everything together and break stuff. So we're just going to turn it over slowly by hand if it's an engine you care about. Now, for this particular engine, I really don't care about it. So we'll just hit it with the starter. There, that should be at least 2 times. That's a really bad thing to do. That's real hard on the camshaft. You don't want to crank an engine with the starter if it's an engine you care about. Now that we have not cranked it with the starter, we've just barred it over by hand nice and slow, what we'll do is we'll get this thing ready to fire up. Now if it's been sitting for a really long time, you'll want to take the feed and return off the fuel pump, put them into a clean container, and make sure that's all good to go. This is a 20-ounce bottle filled with gasoline. This is the cap that comes on any gear oil bottle. Keep these around. If I buy 3 quarts of gear oil for something, I'll cut one of them, use it for that, and I'll keep a couple more. These are pretty useful. Notice that it threads right on a 20-ounce bottle. Now on this carburetor, we've got 2 float bowls, front and rear. This is a Holley type carburetor, kind of a weird Holley. We're gonna go ahead, this is our vent, front, rear. So what I'll do is I'll take my bottle with this nozzle on it, and I'm going to fill these float bowls. In some of my other videos, I've gone over what happens as far as these carburetors drying out. This one is probably dry right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and fill it up. Okay. And then the secondaries is probably a little bit less important right now. But we'll go ahead, we'll fill that up. So now there should be gas front and rear, and I spilled it all over the place. So if we get a good backfire, the whole top of this thing will light on fire, and that'll be fun to deal with. So at this point, we still have not cranked the engine with the starter. It's a good idea to check the ignition system. And on these Chryslers, you can do it if you have a spare distributor. You just unplug it, take the coil wire off, spin the spare distributor, and everything else works, then you're probably good. On this Chrysler, right down here, this is the ignition box. I'm not sure how well it's going to show up on camera, but there's like an ooze coming down underneath it. That's a bad sign. That often indicates a bad ignition box, which would mean we won't have spark and the engine won't start. Now I have the key turned on. I have a wire out here that I can engage the starter automatically. So the ignition's on. This thing should fire right with the carburetor full. If we verified our ignition system, this engine should theoretically fire right away and run. And that's what we want. We want it to fire up right away, and as soon as it builds oil pressure, we actually want to rev it up a little bit to throw oil up on the camshaft. We'll see what happens. This one might start. So this thing actually fired right up. That's not too bad. I consider that a win. I'm going to go ahead and drive this back outside and leave it sit under a tree for quite a while. Thanks for watching. Hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you later. What the hell is that?